And welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk. This is Debbie Georgatos. So glad you've tuned in tonight. Okay, we have a very special guest. I mentioned before we went to the break, a special guest in this segment, Dr. Michael Cox. He is the founding director of SMU's O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom, and he's also the former chief economist of the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. He's a PhD in economics, and I'm just going to tell on you because I have you online, and you can't, and you're going to answer my questions. But we had lunch recently to talk about some of the things I wanted to ask him about, and honestly, Dr. Cox is so well informed that we really could have done a 2-hour show just on the kind of questions I want to ask him, but he just has a lot to share. But I want to tune right away. And first of all, hello, good evening, Dr. Cox.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Just great. Glad to have you. Okay, so here what I want to tune in on. So there has been talk in this election cycle about all the jobs in the factory manufacturing leaving America, and that one way to encourage businesses not to leave and not to go to foreign soil to produce, and actually to punish American businesses that have moved abroad, is to impose high tariffs on the import of goods. And so I want to ask an economist, what does that do? What's the consequence of high tariffs to prevent businesses from leaving or to encourage them to come back?
Well, it may be the worst idea ever. There are a lot of bad ideas that politicians like to throw around, but nothing ever damaged America more than the tariffs that we tried to impose on foreign nations back in the 1920s. It eventually led in the 20s and the 30s to a collapse of world trade into the Great Depression.
Okay, why is that? And honestly, I told you before, because I just love listening and learning from you, Dr. Cox. But in a very, kind of walk us through why. How do tariffs end up hurting the economy? What happens when you impose them?
First of all, let's remember, tariffs raise the price of things to consumers in America. So right off they hurt consumers. And what you're doing, let's come up with a plan where we hurt American consumers in order to supposedly help American producers. But they don't even help American producers in the long run, even if they do in the short run. Because what happens is this: when you decide you're going to put a tariff on our nation's import of foreign goods, then there are three ways that damages the American economy. The first and most obvious way is that when we decide to tariff their goods, foreigners' goods, foreigners will in turn decide to tariff our goods and put a tax on importing American products into their countries. You can't slap them in the face and say, "No, I dare you to slap me back." That's exactly what happened in the 1930s. Is that when Hoover passed the Smoot-Hawley, when he finally signed into law the Smoot-Hawley tariff, 1,028 economists petitioned Hoover not to do it, but he did it anyway. And as a result of it, they put tariffs on our products, all of our products, to the point where global trade went down by 90% during the Great Depression, and that's what caused the Great Depression. They don't buy our goods, and that's the first way it hurts you. It hurts you also because if you decide to put a tariff on their goods, then that subsidizes our industry. Our industry doesn't get strong when it's subsidized; it gets weak. The way to make an industry strong is to make it productive. People think about this in the real world. Wherever you see a subsidy, you see you're creating weakness. Look at your children. Do you make life easy for your children? Do you make them stronger or do you make them weaker? Well, but in order to solve the problem of trade, you have to make American workers more productive. American agricultural workers, for example, are 30 times as productive as Chinese agricultural workers. So that's why we can have high wages in agriculture, and we don't have coolie wages in agriculture because we are 30 times as productive as them. So the secret is to get rid of labor unions, get rid of American tariffs, get rid of the high taxes on American corporations, get the jobs back here in America through not having a 40% income tax rate. And so our labor unions become also inefficient become very powerful under tariffs. And you just have, it just sucks the lifeblood out of the country. And then the third way it hurts America is that when you tariff imports, oftentimes you are tariffing products that we use in production. If you put a tariff on steel, you raise the price of steel in America, you make American cars more expensive, and you make our cars uncompetitive on world markets. If you tariff sugar, which we do a lot. You make American candy, and it's too expensive. And again, the global airports and the foreign candy sales, and so on. For lumber from Canada, you hurt American producers who use foreign products and intermediate products in the production process. So it's the worst idea ever. It is something that it's designed to protect American industry, but it inevitably leads to the worsening of American industry and the American economy.
You know, we talked about before, Dr. Cox. We're speaking with Dr. Michael Cox, whom I'm so grateful to have on our show tonight. He is at Southern Methodist University, SMU. He's the founding director of their O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom, and also the former chief economist of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So I love this, and we've talked about this idea before that in other arenas, you know, like if someone's a brain surgeon, I would listen to his advice about, or if I had to, what brain surgery is all about, or any other expert. If an architect, I would want an architect's input on, you know, how to build a building. And economists are the same thing. It's a actual study of and a creation of using factual data, watching patterns. So it's what you're talking about in tariffs. I think it's important. It's not like there's a back and forth, and it is what you're talking about is based on data and past history. I think it's just so important to emphasize.
Yes. And why did American stock market boom in the 1980s and the 1990s? Specifically because, and why did the American economy boom? Specifically because we opened up free trade. We had NAFTA. We had several rounds of general agreements for tariffs and trade. We opened up not just the trade in the goods market, but also trade in the capital markets, where people could borrow abroad, lend abroad, and invest abroad, not just America, but Japan. And so we learned the lesson in the positive way during the 80s and 90s is that with freer trade and more trade comes a better economy. With less trade and a closing down of borders and tariffs and so on, we learned that. We learned it the rough way, the terrible way during the Great Depression, and the good way recently. These are not, we do not want to take these ideas coming out of certain politicians' mouths seriously, no matter who the politicians are. It's just devastating to an economy.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So if you were advising Congress or the president about the fact that we do have many companies taking manufacturing abroad, going to Mexico or some other place in the world and moving manufacturing there, are there economic policies the federal government could embrace that would encourage bringing those businesses back if we're going to cross off tariffs as one of the choices?
Over the past 25 years, virtually every other nation in the world has cut their corporate income tax rate. Germany started off with a 60% corporate income tax rate, and it's cut theirs to 25%. Japan cut theirs. Every European nation cut theirs. Most of the world cut their corporate income tax rate. The United States did not. We still have a 40% corporate income tax rate, and only one nation in the world has one higher than us, Chad. So we're in the company of Chad when it comes to our policies. So what has this done for America? It has shipped our jobs overseas. Because who wants to invest in American companies when you pull out the profits in the form of dividends or earnings or so on, and before you can get your hands on $1, the government takes 40 cents of it away. So foreigners don't invest here anymore. American companies have shifted jobs overseas. They produce their goods overseas instead of in America. They don't have the tax because they produce it in the foreign subsidiary. Multinationals have started to produce a lot more. Not just started to, but they're now producing a lot more abroad than in America. Our corporate income tax rate is the thing we could get rid of or cut it to 10, 15%. And I've even done calculations. I can prove to you that if the government were to cut the corporate income tax rate, even the government would benefit by having more overall tax revenue. It's the same way that happened under the Reagan administration when they cut the tax rate. Overall revenues eventually went up because it made the economy stronger. So that's an easy proof, but yet we still don't do it. And that's the number one way we could grow American, get business back at home.
I love that because it's so simple, and as you lay it out, it's so logical. And you hear politicians actually. I think everyone on the GOP side was saying we have to reduce corporate income tax rates. We have to reduce our and somehow that we're not able to accomplish that in Washington. But again, if it's so factual, it's so frustrating that we can't just do that. Another thing I want to ask you, though, I think that there's an argument that some businesses leave America because of our regulatory environment, that we have too much regulation, and especially in the environmental arena. We have 1 minute till this segment is over. Dr. Cox, can you hang on through the break?
You bet. I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much. We're talking with Dr. Michael Cox. I love having him on, talking about what do we do to actually bring businesses back to America, which was a discussion and is an ongoing discussion this election cycle. What do we do when we see that jobs are leaving America, and we want to do something that is wise and doesn't hurt America? And so we're talking about how you do that. So we're going to go off to our break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about that. Also tell you about the really coolest thing SMU is doing to try to help young high school students actually emerge from high school understanding why free markets are great. Welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk? So glad you tuned in. Tonight we're going back to speak some more with Dr. Michael Cox of SMU. He's a PhD in economics and just a really good explainer of economics things. So I do want you to tell our listeners about the program at SMU, the Texas Economic Freedom Project. But before we do that, I want to ask you one more thing, Dr. Cox, about all this stuff about companies sending business, they're choosing to manufacture elsewhere. Isn't there something kind of right about the idea that America has evolved from an agrarian economy where you have majority of people working in agriculture to a manufacturing economy to essentially a service economy, that there may be a right distribution of the kinds of things needed, that maybe it's smarter to have manufacturing of products, manufacturing facilities. It's more logical to have them in different countries, and that's kind of okay, right? It's a free market. It's a freedom concept. Isn't that right?
Right. The way to wealth is not through it goes through manufacturing, but it doesn't end with manufacturing. It ends with people having high levels of education where you become doctors, lawyers, dentists, accountants, engineers, computer programmers, biological and life scientists, and everything I just mentioned and more are service sector jobs where we produce a lot of value. America has a large service sector surplus. We have a deficit in our manufacturing arena and in our goods, and that's largely because we're not as competitive in goods markets as we should be, and that's largely because American workers are not as productive as they need to be. The kind of policies we need are policies which make labor unions smaller. When you make the labor union smaller, you make, as bad as it sounds, hey, it's a good thing to have to compete to be good at your job. And, when you get better and better at it, you become more productive, and you can become competitive on world markets, and we can export goods once again. So most wealthy nations are wealthy through finally getting to the service sector. They still retain some manufacturing sector, and I would love to see American manufacturing be larger, but only through our workers becoming more productive, not through them being, us taxing foreign plants and suffering, making American consumers suffer by not being able to buy their products.
I just love all that you just said, including I found that very helpful that when people hear the moving to a kind of service sector economy, I think people can have a very narrow view of that and think, well, there couldn't be enough jobs in that. And I know you're saying we can have some manufacturing here too, but it's a broad thing, and it's actually a kind of uplifting thing. The jobs are much more widespread than just you mentioned with respect to healthcare, the service industry is a lot of things, and they do bring good jobs even for people who aren't highly skilled. Is that?
The problem goes back to our public schools, quite frankly, and let's just face it, they're government schools, and they standardize everything. When I was growing up, there were a lot of people who didn't really want to get a job in the service sector. They wanted to be work with their hands. And I used to be able to take shop and get good at things like that. We don't, in our educational system today, we don't give much credence or credit or respect to the fact that those are good jobs. And you could teach people in American schools how to be productive in a factory. That would be part of what they could learn to do. You could teach them the Six Sigma stuff, how to be, high quality, and I think that that's something that's a legitimate thing for people to do for a living if they want to do it. But let's not kid ourselves. The income distribution in America that we have today, which is very wide, is a first approximation. It's the education distribution, and the people who make really good living are the ones, by and large, who are well educated in our colleges and beyond. And our high school students today, there's 70% of Americans still don't go on from high school to college. How does a high school worker today get into the middle class? When your terminal degree is a high school degree and they're not teaching you how to be productive in a factory or anymore. How do we get into the middle class? America's first middle class was born in the industrial age, of industrial age workers. So I know it's I could go on and on about this, but
I'm glad. Yeah, we're talking with Dr. Michael Cox, and I'm so glad you did go on and on about that. We talked about that when we met to talk about this show. We talked about how, there's just kind of too much focus by some in the political arena about, the income distribution is too wide, the income inequality is too wide, and it's really educational inequality that gets you out of that is what should be focused on and can be addressed by public policy, by people caring more and working toward having a higher percentage of people getting a degree that's helpful out of high school or beyond, helpful to actually getting them a job. Right. I love that you raised that. I want to quick change gears here because these segments go by so quickly, it's really frustrating. But we were talking about how it's kind of astonishing that Bernie Sanders and actually Hillary, too, to a lesser degree, can be as successful as they are in running for president when Bernie Sanders, is openly calling himself a socialist. In an earlier segment tonight, we talked about what's happening in Venezuela, which is heartbreaking and preventable and the result of socialist ideas. So I love when you're telling me about something that SMU has undertaken. I think you call it the Texas Economic Freedom Project, and what you're doing to correct this in America. So can you tell our listeners about that?
Right. Now, Texas is obviously the most successful state in America. It's the state we're receiving the most migrants from other states. The Americans are moving in mass today. We're in the largest period of migration from state to state ever, and they're coming here. And they're coming here for the successful Texas economy. So we want to keep it that way. They're coming here because if you come to Texas, you can make a better life for yourself and your family. We are the new world. It's a low-tax state. We have no income tax. Labor unions with the right-to-work state, and labor unions are a very small force around the state compared to other states. We have a relatively small government. You can't come here for welfare. If you're coming here from abroad to come take welfare, might as well move on. We don't give them much welfare around this state. And so Texas is a very free market state, and people are simply coming here for that, to start, for self-determination, self-actualization, just make a better life for themselves and their family. They believe in themselves, and they know if they come to Texas, and by and large they're right, they can do well. So they're coming here in droves. Well, we want to keep it that way, and the way to keep it that way is to make sure that our new citizens from California or from Mexico, wherever they come from, and our indigenous residents all understand free markets, because Texas's success is coming from us being the most free market state in America, and we have measures of that in our center. So, and we invite you to look at those and contact us. And so we started a project to help, as a part of our Texas Economic Freedom Project. We started another project to educate Texas high school students. We started this year. We have a pilot program to go into the school districts and HISD, DISD, down in San Antonio, all across the border in Texas, and teach the teachers free market economics. Now, the state of Texas, the legislature has mandated that our high school teachers have to teach free market economics, and we said that's just great. We are the free marketplace, so we'll teach you how to, at a very basic level, how to teach free market economics to the students in the way they'll know and understand and love and appreciate.
I just love that. If every student left high school understanding why the beauty of free enterprise and free markets and how America became prosperous, they wouldn't be able to get duped by someone like Bernie Sanders selling socialism. But it's because they don't know, and socialism sounds to them like it's kind of like about sharing. It's about being nice. It's about, and it just could not be more harmful, especially to the poorest of the poor. It's an amazing thing.
I spent time in the Soviet Union. I spent time in Cuba. I know how those systems really work. It's a disaster. People were so depressed when I was in the Soviet Union. Even the architecture was depressing. I told some guy when I was in line there to get to buy some food one day, and you're in line all the time looking for stuff. I said, I think if I lived here, I was telling one of my compadres from Stanford University, the Hoover Institution, if I lived there, I'd just take a gun and shoot myself. And the guy behind me, who was from Leningrad at the time, it's back to being St. Petersburg now, the guy behind me said, "Where would you get a bullet?"
Oh.
And
yep.
I mean, people have no rights. The end result of socialism is exactly what Winston Churchill said, that the The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings, semicolon. But the inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. Yes, we'll be all poor. We'll all be equal, but we all be equally poor. No opportunity. Tremendously self-defeating, defeats the human spirit. I saw so many people, men in particular, just walking around with their heads down. No point of being an entrepreneur. Come up with an idea, got to go run it through the Politburo. Everything is committee decision. Everything is the individual rights are squashed for the collective good, and it's a nightmarish. Socialism in practice, in theory, might be heaven, but in practice, it's hell.
I love that you said that. We're speaking with Dr. Michael Cox, and sometime I have to tell you, Dr. Cox, I went to Soviet Union also and went to Moscow. Kevin Leningrad was still socialist, still communist. Wow, misery personified. Thank you so very much for calling in. It was just great talking with you.
Thank you, Debbie.